This is Pixelated Audio, and today we're listening to music from Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis.
You're listening to Pixelated Audio, a bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast. We're your humble hosts. I'm James, and this is Brian.
Hey, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be playing music and talking about Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis, and I am very excited because this has a totally rockin' soundtrack we can't wait to share with you.
Yeah, we literally decided to do this episode just a few days ago. We had something else planned and decided to hold off on it, and while we were listening to music randomly, this soundtrack came up and we decided we have to play it.
Yeah, it needs a little extra attention, I think.
Yeah.
That track that brought us in was the opening theme from Alisia Dragoon, composed by Mecano Associates.
Super cool. I liked how you could totally hear the classical sound on the Genesis. Really cool soundtrack. Really cool opening track for the game, actually.
Yeah, super cool, super Mozart.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how it really it sets the theme, the tone of the game as this old world kind of old style Dungeons and Dragons kind of high fantasy feel, and it kind of carries that throughout the game. And we'll kind of get into some more tracks and talk about the details of the game later, but I think having something that's kind of more soft and elegant, a little bit more classical in the beginning as that opening cutscene plays, is quite cool. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get much more high fantasy than dragons as pets and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
But it was just really neat to see that this wasn't like a really terrible, like video game in quotes sounding track that most people would consider of a classical song. Like, this sounded really, really good on the Genesis.
Yeah, I think the Genesis does a very good job. The YM2612 does an excellent job of capturing the live feel, like that real true tone of the an organ, like an actual organ, those kind of like pipes and brassy, really kind of high notes. I think that for FM, it really can do so much more to create these very open and live timbres that we can't really get without faking through samples.
Right.
So, yeah, props to Mecano Associates, because on the Genesis, this sounds incredible.
Yeah, and you guys are going to see that this is an incredible soundtrack today.
Right. We're talking it up quite a lot, but let's talk about this game a little bit. So, Alisia Dragoon is a 2D action platformer for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, published by Sega here in the States in 1992, and developed by both Game Arts and Gainax.
Now, Game Arts is a Japanese game developer and publisher created in 1985 and based in Tokyo, Japan. They've had their hand in developing and co-developing some amazing titles, like the Sylphid series, the Lunar series, which Lunar the Silver Star came out just a couple months after Alisia Dragoon, so very close. And they've also done a ton of other Lunar games, as well as the Grandia series, so that's really awesome. Some amazing series under their belt. They've also done some work on titles like Bomberman Generations, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Smash Up, which is essentially like a Smash Brothers kind of clone with turtles.
Have you played that? I've never played
it, but I heard some people say that it actually plays pretty well. It just was not really that great of a game.
Oh,
that it was fun, but it just was a total clone, I guess.
Those later Turtle games, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just didn't do it for me.
Yeah. Well, Game Arts has also been involved in some recent stuff too. Like, they're still making games. Some of the recent games are Ragnarok Odyssey and Dokuro, both for the Vita, and their most recent game being Grandia 2 Anniversary Edition for the PC.
I would love to try Grandia 2 Anniversary Edition.
Yeah,
because the Dreamcast version was stellar.
Yeah, it's an amazing game.
Yeah.
And that's got some amazing game mechanics too.
Yeah. So Gainax. Gainax is one of Japan's most well-loved, well-known animation studios. On the animation side, they're known for the Evangelion anime and movies.
Can't really get much bigger than that.
Yeah, and Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, Gunbuster. They have a title called Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt.
Yeah, I actually looked into that one a little bit, and it's, I guess
I knew you would.
I guess it follows two angels named Panty and Stocking, and they get kicked out of heaven for being bad or something like that. And then Garter Belt is another character that they meet. So I just thought, well, this is crazy.
Only in Japan. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, but, it kind of makes sense. I mean, Gainax started as kind of like a doujin group, right? Mm-hmm. Going to those Comic-Cats and getting like all these fans on board with their anime and their manga and stuff. And,
right.
It started really humble beginnings and grew into this massive, very well-loved publishing and developing house. But animation was the bread and butter. However, they also developed and published some of their own titles based on some of the franchises they owned. Obviously, like the Neon Genesis Evangelion games.
Yeah, I mean, they even made a strip Mahjong game featuring Evangelion characters for the Saturn and PlayStation. So, I mean, they really love that series.
Again, if a company hasn't done a strip Mahjong game, they're not officially a company yet.
Right. And they did some other Evangelion games that were pretty interesting, like a typing game for the Dreamcast. And then they also had this really odd game for the Sega Saturn that wasn't actually a game. It was called Yoshiyuki Sadamoto Illustrations. And like I said, it's not a game, it's a digital art gallery of that artist. So, and he was actually a character designer and artist for Evangelion, Dot Hack, Gunbusters, and a ton of other stuff. So it's actually a pretty cool disc filled with a ton of amazing illustrations.
I haven't tried that.
Yeah, neither have I.
I think we're going to have to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Interesting. Anyways, they also developed the Princess Maker series, the Cybernetic High School series, which I have not played, but
yeah.
I heard it was pretty popular. And then they also lent a hand on development with companies like Game Arts to do stuff like Alisia Dragoon. Anyways, let's get into another track. I think it's time for some music.
Yeah.
We'll try to keep it a little shorter this time because, I think the music speaks for itself in a lot of this. So this is Stage 1-1, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
That was Stage 1-1, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis.
I love this song so much.
Yeah.
When I heard this the other day, it kind of took me by surprise. Like, this soundtrack wasn't completely foreign to me. I had heard it before, but I hadn't really heard this track, and this is, I think, arguably the most well-known track in Japan. It's actually quite high up on the charts.
Yeah.
And when I heard it, I really, it took me back a little bit, because you have all these real-world instruments. It's kind of playing with that old style, like very, again, high fantasy,
right?
But bringing all those instruments into like a modern kind of track,
right?
I think that's so clever.
Yeah, they've preserved some of that classical kind of like regal sound that that opening track had, but then brought it into, like you're saying, a little bit more of a actual, standard video game track where it has like a, fast tempo, good, transitions and stuff like that. It was really cool.
Yeah, I think just instrumentally, you have these very almost like low pan flutes or like ocarinas. Mm-hmm. Like the bass is very plucky. It sounds like a man-made, fabricated instrument by hand. Mm-hmm. Everything just sounds very alive and old, like old world, and bringing it into this almost just rockin' track. I love that transition.
Yeah,
I don't know. It does it for me.
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing this game for this episode, I fell in love with this game just on level 1. I mean, this track was so good. I mean, the opening track was cool, and it was a nice sound for the Genesis. But this first track for the first level was just so amazing and blew me away that I was just so excited. I mean, it has some cool little stereo pans going on. Awesome flutes. I love that. The drums.
Do you want to hear that little flute in the beginning?
Oh,
it's
yeah,
so cool.
It's so beautiful.
It kind of flutters in. Hold on, let's listen to that real quick. Oh, see, that's so rad. Huh?
Yeah, that flute sound was so cool. I mean,
it's like an owl.
It really adds to that, like you said before, like that man-made kind of instrument. Like it sounds like it was something that was made by someone,
like a handcrafted, hand-chiseled or whittled or whatever.
Yeah, like back in the medieval times and stuff like that. So it really retained that feeling that the game had, but had a really awesome rockin' transition to something a little bit more heavy and hardcore, which I really liked. It was really well designed. I mean, this was a really cool track that just kept that emotion going.
Yeah, and it's really the team of composers, I think, that was able to pull off kind of this unique sound. And Mecano Associates, I think, just nailed it with this soundtrack. And a lot of the other stuff that they've done has been pretty stellar. So they were a small contracting studio formed in 1986 that specialized in music for games, movies, TV shows, commercials, and even some CD mastering stuff. They were based in Tokyo, or Shimokitazawa rather, which is known for its live local music venues. But in the VGM space, most of their work was contracted by either UPL or Game Arts.
And they've done some pretty cool titles, like you were mentioning. They've done Thexter 2, Sylpheed for the PC-88, Fujitsu Micro 7, PC, as well as the Sega CD version. They've got Vikes, Zeliard, Atomic Robo Kid for the arcade, as well as some other systems, Omega Fighters, Ninja Kids, and a handful of other really amazing titles.
Yeah, I think all their soundtracks, too, have been pretty top-notch.
Yeah.
I started going through a few of them, and I was like, wow, man, I didn't realize. I mean, we listen to the music, and we were like, oh, this has a great soundtrack. And then we kind of don't think about the team that did it sometimes.
Right.
But when you really focus on a soundtrack that's stellar like this one, and then you start going through some of their other stuff, you really realize, oh, man, this is just a rock-solid rock star team.
Yeah, and you see back in the day, a lot of these people have done tons of games. I mean, we have seen composers that have hundreds of games to their names. So seeing groups, I mean, there could be insane soundtracks out there that we just haven't even come across yet.
Yeah, and there's plenty more discovery in the future. But the driver that they used was kind of special. They weren't using any generic driver. They had their own custom driver specifically for their music. So that usually adds another layer of complexity and dynamicism in the tracks, I think, because just using something like the Gems, everything is going to sound muddled and the same. But having this honed in driver for them, I think did them justice.
Yeah, you take the time to make the driver, you know it a little bit better, and it's designed for a little bit of a unique sound, I guess.
Well, there's a lot of back and forth between how this driver was created, but we'll get into that more in a minute. Let's get into another track. So after you beat stage 1-1, that last track we heard, it feeds right into another stage called stage 1-2. So let's listen to that, and we'll be right back.
You just heard Stage 1-2 or 1-2 composed by Mecano Associates.
Now, this is a really mysterious, quite different than the first track.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot, though.
Oh, yeah. This reinforced my love for the soundtrack right away. I mean, like I said, that first track was really good. And I was like, really happy. And when I got to level 1-2, I was like, oh man, it's continuing. This is so good.
Yeah. That stereo separation in the beginning is to die for.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Really kind of strong accents on the kick drum. You get the dun, dun, and left and right and left and right. And then at the same time, you're getting these little scales, like flourishes on both ears. And the just play and bounce between the stereo sounds is just fun to listen to, so enjoyable. And it makes the game have this level of like, because it's coming in the right side and sometimes it's coming in the left. So it's almost like the sound is also the mystery. It's also the anticipation. You don't know where it's going to come next.
Right.
And I like that about this track.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, that kind of give and take in the beginning, the little playfulness I really liked, and then the bells, and there's like this rising feel to the track right in the beginning where there's that low hum that's kind of picking up, and then the track breaks out into that kind of sad melody that's going on, and then it just keeps picking up pace. And it kind of added to like, okay, you beat level 1-1 and 1-2 is a little bit tougher, and you're getting a little bit more tired as a character, and things are getting harder. And I like that the track kind of felt like it was getting a little tougher.
Yeah, it follows like the story of the gameplay, I guess.
Right.
But I did like in the first track, it starts speeding up, and you kind of get this almost like kind of grungy, like rock sound, and then stage 1-2 switches it and makes it a little bit more, it kind of brings it back to what we heard in the beginning of like that intro track where it's a little bit more classical, but then the drums kick in and everything starts getting a little bit more upbeat, but it still retains that unknown vibe.
Yeah, like this track is not very long, but it really sets the mood for this level.
Yeah, we'll have to loop it a few times. So Mecano Associates was composed of a few different people. There was Fumihito Kasatani, Nobuyuki Aoshima, Mamoru Ishimoto, Yoko Tsunoda, and Mariko Sato. And as a team, I think they were able to totally rock the soundtrack out of the park. Nobuyuki Aoshima was one of the main components of Mecano Associates and was involved to some degree in most of the titles that they worked on. In later years, he went on to do programming for like Time Crisis 2, Urban Reign, Soul Calibur Legends, and even Smash Brothers for the Wii U and 3DS.
Yeah, so Mamoru Ishimoto and Yoko Tsunoda were both subcontractors for Mecano, and they worked on games like Sylphied, this game, and Dead Moon. And there was Mariko Sato, who also worked on this game as well as Sylphied.
Yes, and then Fumihito Kasatani, he was credited in this game as the sound producer. Fumihito Kasatani, a.k.a. Cass, was a musician and sound engineer from Osaka that moved up to Tokyo to create Mecano Associates and hired one of his closest friends, Nobuyuki Aoshima. And he was responsible for pretty much everything we listed earlier that the company ever worked on. We have a lot more info on Kasatani and Mecano, but let's get into another track. So what do we got, James?
Next up, like you might have guessed, we have stage 1-3, and we'll be right back.
Awesome. That was stage 1-3 from Alisia Dragoon, composed by Fumihito Kasatani, Nobuyuki Aoshima, Mamoru Ishimoto, Yoko Tsunoda, and Mariko Sato.
Very cool. This gave me a Golden Axe feel for sure.
Oh my god, I wrote Golden Axe.
Yeah.
Gee, why do you keep looking at my paper?
No, it's so Golden Axe, but then I love how the track transitions into something different.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I think the Golden Axe reference comes from that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, right in the beginning.
Yeah, so I that was the first thing I wrote here, and then after that, you know, it's a very victorious track. It's very, very different from the first track, the second track we heard from stage 1, 1, 1, 2, and this takes a very different approach.
And I think if you listen to all three of those tracks in succession, I feel like they kind of add up to a little bit of a story arc where like the first track is kind of adventurous and more kind of like fun and getting into it, and it kind of gets like more rocking and harder at the end. And then the second track makes it feel like, okay, this is going to be like a kind of tediously wearing battle. It's not going to be as easy as you would expect. And then maybe the third track, the one we just listened to, has that little bit more victorious, like I'm getting the hang of it. I'm progressing, and you know, I'm understanding these controls and getting a move on and an understanding of this game, which I really liked. And I liked how this track has a very kind of fluttery, twinkly parts to it, and then it has that really low, heavy, kind of rumbly feel to the track, which I liked a lot. I liked the juxtaposition of those two.
Yeah, and going back to that story arc kind of thing with the game, I think the gameplay really goes along with the music very, very well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the game a little bit, because it is a totally awesome game.
Yeah.
Totally fun.
Yeah, this game is that's two amazing boxes checked for the game, the music and the gameplay. And this game, like we mentioned before, is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer consisting of 8 levels with enemies and environmental hazards like pits and lava, each ending with a boss fight that is both challenging and different.
Some of those boss fights are insanely difficult.
Yeah.
And then some of them are super easy. But, you know, I think the variety in bosses is pretty sweet.
Oh yeah, you got to get used to those patterns.
But that all comes down to the control scheme, and I think the controls are stellar.
Yeah, I mean, this game only has 3 buttons. It's on the Sega Genesis, so it is relatively simple. You have your B button as your main lightning attack.
So let me explain the lightning attack. This is the main attack in the game, and it's this lightning bolt, and it shoots straight out. But as soon as an enemy gets on the screen, it kind of auto targets on everybody. So like, let's say there's like 30 enemies on the screen, it'll auto target on all of them. It kind of reminds me of Bangai-O, like
a little bit.
Shoot what's his name's blast. What's that kid's name?
Riki,
that's right. You shoot Riki's blast and it kind of homes in on everybody.
Yeah.
That's how her lightning attack works.
It reminds me of that globe from like the 70s and 80s that you touch, and then the lightning comes to your finger. It's like kind of is all going everywhere, and then it kind of focuses in on an enemy, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So that it'll split up into like different beams and stuff like that, and it'll take out enemies, which I think looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, it does look pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it's adds to this appreciated level of strategy, I think.
Yeah, and it also has a meter, and it drains as you use it, and it gets a little bit weaker as the meter drains down, which is pretty cool. That adds to that level of strategy you were just mentioning. But if you don't use it, it regenerates, and once it gets fully charged, it does this like mega blast, like this rolling blast that attacks everything on the screen.
Yeah, and it does a lot of damage that way.
Yeah.
So your meter up in the top is like this lightning bolt, and the very tip of it is like almost like you're looking at like a meter, like your voice meter, like I'm looking at our recording levels right now.
Right.
If it starts peaking out in that red area, that's when you have the most power.
Right.
But it slowly builds up in those last 3 segments. Everything before that is kind of quick to recharge.
Yeah, and they right off the bat start you with a lot of enemies that are just flying at you crazy. So at first you think, okay, I want to keep that meter pretty charged, but you don't really get a chance to. So in those moments of nothing really going on, you really have to force yourself to kind of wait and let it recharge and hope that more enemies don't just keep coming at you.
Yeah.
So you have the C button for your jump, and then the A button with the D-pad lets you cycle through her list of dragons or pets that fight alongside you, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, so there's a total of 4 dragons or pets, and they each have their own unique attacks and health. They kind of follow you around, attacking and blocking enemies while you progress. So the first one is Dragon Fry.
Yeah, he's like your standard dragon.
Yeah, and he your standard dragon.
Yeah,
I guess. Okay.
He's like a green dragon that shoots fireballs. So I mean, it's pretty standard.
It's as standard as it gets. Then there's Boomerang Lizard that throws boomerangs.
Yeah. Which I actually thought was cool. It's a super cool idea. He's got a really cool drawing in the manual. And I mean, it's a dragon that throws boomerangs. That's kind of neat.
No, he's a lizard.
Lizard.
There's a difference, James.
I guess.
And Thunder Raven that has this electric-based attack. And then finally, Ball O Fire that burns enemies on contact.
Yeah.
Those are pretty clever names.
Yeah, he kind of looks like a little like flower floating around on the screen, like with little petals. Because it's kind of neat, but it's funny. He definitely doesn't look like a dragon.
Yeah, another great aspect is that over time, Alisia and her pets can improve their abilities by collecting different power-ups. So these power-ups appear in the first 7 stages, mostly hidden and, in different kind of... this game has a lot of secrets. So being able to find these, like, hidden really well, and being able to find these will increase not only your stats, but your pets as well.
And they're, like you said, they're really clever. There's some that are like just barely off the screen. And if you jump in like up against the wall, you can just barely see it. So it's like, oh, wow, I just noticed that and I have to jump and kind of blast it to get the part. But then other things are like hidden, like in other games where they're like behind like false pillars and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
Like there's this one part, I think it's in the stage 1 too, where it looks like a pillar, but there's like a little tiny etch carved out for like your foothold or something. And you jump on that a few times and you get up to the secret area. I'm like, oh my God, that's so clever. That's what I love about games. Like those kind of secrets that you find. And I was genuinely excited when I found it. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. It was like playing Mario for the first time and finding how to skip to the warp, the warp tunnels. So.
Yeah. So you collect these power-ups and it increases not only your health, but your pet's health as well. And there's different meters for that. And they do more damage based on the level that they're at.
Yeah. So it also adds to that level strategy where you might have one dragon that you like and you end up kind of leveling that one up a lot, and then the other ones are pretty weak, so you got to kind of maybe cycle through or find ones that work really well for other levels. So and it increases your health, like you said, so that's something you have to watch out for. So if they die, you just can't bring them back. They don't come back until you find a revive power up, which are hidden, and then once you revive them, they have lost all their power-ups. So they're back down to the base level, which kind of sucks.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, though. The thing about this, because they can block stuff for you. There's this one level, I think it's later on, maybe level 6. I actually beat the game just the other night. Like, it's not that long. It's like maybe an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. You can get through it pretty quick, especially if you save states. But there's this level where these bad guys will shoot this orb at you, and you can't block it, and it just hones in on you. But your pets can absorb it, and they take damage when they do it, but you have to cycle through them, because if you get to the end, like I had like my Dragonfry or whatever was like level 6 or something. His health was like all the way up, but I got right to the end and I missed it, and he got hit, and I was like, oh no. And so I lost him. Yeah. And then I went through all my weaker ones, and I was like, whatever. Yeah. But it's a really cool aspect I didn't think was actually needed for the game, but it adds so much to it.
Oh yeah, it made this game stand out as very different. One other thing that was done a little bit differently is that in this game you start out with 1 life, and that's it.
Right. So
if you die, it's kind of game over. But throughout the game, if you collect lives, those act as your continues. So then when you die, you use a continue and you get to start from that level that you were at, that you died in. So that would allow you to kind of search out these different power-ups and hopefully come across some extra lives that you can save up for later on when it gets even harder with, enemies that are just all over the place.
Yeah. So, kind of going back to the controls, when I first started playing, I thought, I was like, it's kind of stiff controls. I don't know how I feel about it, but really, like when you start putting in the strategy elements to it, the controls feel rock solid.
Yeah.
Everything just flows very well. They put a lot of time into thinking how I think the player would react and respond to certain situations, and it makes everything feel very connected. Doesn't at all hinder the game in any way that, Alisia kind of moves slowly, or I think it works really well for this title.
Yeah, and it allows that with all the enemies that are just bombarding you to have a little bit of time. You have your minimal controls, and then you have your dragons, so you have your layers of complexity that they add up really nicely.
Yeah. So there is somewhat of a story here. It's kind of neat. We'll get into that in a little bit. Let's get into some more music. This is from Stage 2, and it's composed by Mecano Associates.
You just heard Stage 2, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
This kind of has like a medieval carnival
Yeah.
feel to it. Whimsical, I guess.
Yeah, it's got that kind of, I can see the whimsicalness from like the scales and all the little like flourishes that are going on, all the little kind of like riffs and stuff.
Yeah.
I liked how this one was more in the higher end compared to the last track that was more in the low end. So I thought it was a nice transition into something a little bit more chimey, more bells, kind of showing off some of that sound.
That brings up a good point because I feel like the bass on this track is a lot more in the high range.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like some of the other bass sounds that we're going to hear have a lot more depth to them, a lot more like open sound, a lot
Kinda
more
like that deep rumble.
yeah, like a low cut filter applied to it or something. But this is really more punchy, kind of like that Stage 1-1 track.
Yeah, as the levels are progressing, you're getting a different sound, but it's not bad, and it's not different in a bad way. It's just continuing to explore what these guys are doing.
Yeah, so let's get into another track. I guess we'll just continue with it. Let's go to Stage 3, and we'll be right back.
You just heard Stage 3, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
Wow, what an explosive track, man. I mean, we went from that more mellow sound in Stage 1-3, then to Stage 2, we had kind of more of a kind of goofier sound, a little bit more like carnival-ish.
Yeah.
And then straight into this hard rock and roll, like 90s rock. Totally cool change up.
Yeah.
And I love this.
Yeah, it had like a little bit of a boss fight feel to me because it was so frantic and heroic at the same time. It had that grungy lead that was still fast-paced. The low end was really kind of like subtle and supportive. I thought it was kind of neat. If you really listen to it, you can kind of hear what's going on, but it's real like under the radar type thing. But it really, really ramps up at the end. It gets really frantic, tons of notes, but really well composed. It's not like just like crazy mayhem.
Yeah. Now, there's not a lot of composers that can really get that cool guitar, like grungy guitar sound out of the Genesis and make it, sound good.
Yeah.
And not like, ear piercing, like eyes exploding, bleeding. And I think Toshiaki Sakota is one of them that can pull it off. Fumihito Kasatani, he was the one that actually did the composition for this. And wow, what a crazy guitar, like just powerhouse track.
Right.
I played a little bit for you. So there's this band that I'm in love with. I've listened to them for got to be 15 years now. They're a Japanese band, like kind of rock band called Bees, like B''Z, and they have this track called Mo Ichido. I think it's Mo Ichido Kishitakata or something like that. And it has that da 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 da. It just kind of goes along with this track, and so I played it for you, and you're like, it's not the same track, but man, it sounds it has that similar kind of scale and progression.
Right. Yeah, you could definitely see like a little bit of similarities between the two. It was kind of neat.
Kind of going back to Mecano Associates, we've been listening to a few tracks from them so far. We were actually very fortunate to spend some time chatting with Fumihito Kasatani online. We asked him if he would do an interview with us on the show. He said he was a little bit shy, so didn't actually work out. But what we did do is we sent him an email with some questions, and he gave us a very awesome response back. So you want to just go ahead and read that off? We're going to post it online so you can check it out there.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the next best thing to an interview. I mean it's words directly from them, answering questions that we asked them.
Yeah, and he literally sent this to us yesterday. So I translated it last night, and I think there's some gold in here. So why don't you read the questions, and I'll do the responses.
Sure, I'll get the easy part. All right, so the first question we asked is, can you explain how Mecano Associates started?
Yeah, so he says, I, Kasatani, and Aoshima-san founded Mecano Associates LLC in 1986. We were in a band called Modernista in the early 1980s. He played bass and I was a guitarist, and we were really good friends. At that time, TV and arcade games were the new craze, but we were only interested in doing the music. So for our company, Mecano Associates, companies would come to us and ask them to create music for their games under a contract. We didn't just take whatever jobs we can get. We were in our 20s and young, but we were picky about who we did work for. We only went with companies that respected and cared about music in their games. So I think that's pretty, that's awesome. You know, like even, you know, just kind of to break away from the interview here, to get, you know, to have that mindset already that I only want to work with somebody who really appreciates my trade, not just doing it for the money. I think that's pretty cool.
Especially starting out. I mean, for me as an illustrator, when I graduated from college, it was hard to not just say, okay, yeah, I'll take that job. I don't really care what you're doing, or you're kind of abusing me in a way that it's like, well, I'm getting you for money. But that's really cool to see that they cared that much about the product that they were putting out for everyone.
Yeah. And to continue on, he says, at that time, as well as now, in Japanese business culture, there's a strong sense of senpai kohai mentality, which means like elders want to be bosses, regardless if you work for them or not. And so when he had clients that were older, we had to remain very assertive to produce the sound we wanted. A lot of people told me I was too namaiki, which is kind of like audacious or impertinent. But we believed that keeping our aspirations was the best way to do our business. Anyways, we continued to do game audio for 10 years until I, meaning Kasatani, began to do commercials, TV, and movie scores.
Awesome. Such an awesome response that's just filled with so much character about how they started the company, what they thought about their company, and the music that they were making.
Yeah, I agree.
So the next question we asked was, what was the involvement of the other employees, or how did the team work?
So he says, well, it was actually a small company consisting of really just Aoshima and myself, being Kasatani. And based on the contract, the staff we had hired would change. So some of the staff we'd have work on multiple projects, but I believe most of the people joined after the 90s, and I don't quite remember the team for Alisia Dragoon in detail.
That was a long time ago, so I guess that's forgiven.
Yeah, I was chatting with him. He's like, I was like 25 years ago. Like, he's like, I'm an old guy now. I don't, like I could barely remember what I had for breakfast, let alone, back then. So that's pretty cool.
So next up, we asked him, how did Mecano write music for the Mega Drive, Sega Genesis, and which hardware and software did they use?
And he says, I believe we used Recomposer RCP series by Common Music on the PC 88 or 98 to write the music. For the sound source, we had to simulate it on the PC, both the FM and the PSG, while using the Roland SC88 and the SC55 multi-tone generator. But if needed, such as working on games for other hardware, we also used the Yamaha MSX to write the music and sequence it out. Now, at that time, the music you create with a synthesizer, you really can't achieve the same sound. For example, the sound output by the PC in accordance with the number of simultaneous sounds or channels, usable sounds, and the presence and absence of memory. So when creating this music, we had to be very careful and mindful about the limitations of the sound hardware, in this case, the YM2612 and the Sega PSG. So during Alisia Dragoon, we tried to have similar melodies on the PSG, kind of shadow the FM with that slight lag or delay, while at the same time using different volumes. This way, when a sound effect was playing and taking over an FM channel, the underlying melody would still be heard, causing the player not to realize they were missing much of the overall song. And this is the method we ended up using throughout Alisia Dragoon and continued using it for future titles that we worked on.
That's so awesome that like they even had the sound effects and the gameplay and all that in mind when writing the music, so that the player didn't get taken out of the game by noticing that the music was dropping out or something like that.
Yeah, and that actually is a really cool example, because in that first track and the second track and the third track, if you notice what the PSG is doing, it really is kind of mirroring the main melody. And I think that obviously he's saying that that's what they did. And I think that being able to hear that, because when I was playing the game, I didn't notice it either.
Yeah.
So they must have done a really good job at hiding those missing channels as they were taken out.
And Alisia Dragoon would have been a horrible game with the music cutting out because of sound effects and stuff like that, because you're just bombarded with enemies constantly.
The whole time. You're constantly firing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all you're doing the whole game. So he says, continuing on from that last question, he says, in the 90s, we used a slew of different software. We used Studio Vision, Sound Designer 2, and Sample Cell on the Apple IIci for games. And although I used an analog table and multi in the beginning, this carried over into doing music for TV, commercials, and movies. But I needed more hi-fi sound tools and didn't want to lose quality when using analog to PC conversions. So when the Yamaha 02R came out, we began using digital-only tools such as DigiDesign and also stuff like Fostex for our digital multi. So in the 90s, sampling, or PCM, became much more mainstream with the achievements in gaming machines and new sound chips. So now we had to simulate the sound for FM, PSG, and PCM and convert those to the new data type. Even during the opening track or like the demo mode, some companies wanted only PCM, but in order to do that and have it fit in memory, we had to kind of downmix everything to make it fit. So there were some compromises that we just had to make.
Yeah, I think that was just kind of like the story of most games back in those days, that there was some type of compromise you had to make between sound and visuals and gameplay and all that.
So everything on the N64.
Yeah. So next up we ask, can you describe the process, like a step-by-step guide for what it was like for your team at the time?
And he says the first step was meeting with the game producer. And in this case, it was Miyagi-san and one of the directors. I can't remember his name. And we would talk about the number of music that they needed and what purpose or atmosphere or kind of like a theme would be, so we knew the direction we were going. After that, I would create a demo or sample music to send them for review, and that would determine whether or not we'd move forward with our contract. Normally, the sample music that was brought into the meeting was just like an opening or an ending track that represented the main theme of the game, and some songs that represent like the core theme, like certain stage atmosphere, things like speed and tempo, how the game is actually played out. Until this process, it would be only me and Aoshima-san. Sometimes the other staff wouldn't even be hired at this point. But after Alisia Dragoon and the Mega Drive version of Sylpheed, we started getting actual movies or demos of games to see how our songs would actually match in with the game. But for Alisia Dragoon, it was all conceptual. So they would just give us static images or explain the scenes to us, and we had to kind of go off of that. So again, we'd have a meeting to understand the concept and decide on the direction and discuss the different variations. Once that was decided, we'd hire our staff to help out. And this is when we began writing more tracks to kind of fill out the levels in the gameplay. But during the process, I made sure each staff working on the tracks, they would bring me kind of a sample to make sure that we never deterred too far away from that main kind of image that we wanted to create with the soundtrack. So after Mecano completed the music and sent it in for final review of the completed tracks, the process went over to Game Arts staff, mainly Shimada-san, and he would convert our data and our music to the YM2612 using a custom driver written specifically for us with what we had in mind. That didn't end our process, though. Once the music was sequenced out for the Mega Drive sound chip, we had to hear it back to make sure it sounded the exact way we intended to, and if not, fix the data on our end for resubmission. But what Game Arts would usually ask us to do was decrease the size of data so that it would fit into the RAM, so that it would work with their driver.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty typical as far as like the process that you would kind of imagine.
There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty typical for a lot of developers or to not really hand out a lot of information, or maybe not even be that far into the game development past the idea phase to hand out to people that are doing music or even art and stuff like that. I'm sure that they were just like, this is kind of the idea we're going for. What can you bring us?
Maybe they didn't really have a good way to do it yet.
Yeah.
Know? And so the other thing that's kind of interesting is when he's talking about the driver, and because it was kind of like he did sound engineering, but being able to send it over to Game Arts and the other Game Arts engineer actually sequencing it out and then sending it back. I mean, it's kind of a monotonous process, right? You gotta hope that, you know, everything's going in correctly, and then when you get it back, you're like, oh man, dude, this sounds completely different. You know,
yeah,
redo it all.
Yeah, so I could see there being a lot of back and forth like that. So, but when you're really, you're really picky about the way things sound and you want to turn out the way that you wanted, it's worth it. And when it turns out, I mean, especially over the soundtrack, you can see it was worth all that work.
Yeah. So we have some more questions, right? What do we got?
Yeah. So next up, we asked him specifically, what was your role in Alisia Dragoon soundtrack?
All right. So he says, I kind of had all the roles. And he kind of laughs there. Yeah. He was a music producer, for one. That's what he's credited as. And then he says, I was a music producer, composer, and sound engineer. And because I'm the head of Mecano Associates, I also have to deal with all the contracts and the meetings, pretty much the whole process. So in one word, everything.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like everything.
Yeah. That's a lot on your plate, man.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that it was a smaller team. He was working with one of his greatest friends, and they were in control at every stage of what the contractors were doing, which is a very nice way to set things up. So you're kind of, giving me what you guys are working on. I want to make sure that it's still in the idea and the range of style that we want, and then just keep moving forward, which is nice. I think it's a nice way to manage without micromanaging everything.
Yeah, I think so too. And then lastly, so that was kind of the end of the interview. But lastly, we asked him if he could break down some of the tracks so we can find out who composed what. And what he said was, he said the soundtrack was mostly composed by him and Aoshima. The other contractors would do kind of minor things, add PSG parts, or were instructed. So, for example, Kasatani would be like, I want the PSG to do this and this. I want you to write it out and sequence it out. That way we can send it in. And so they would kind of have that role. So Kasatani and Aoshima touched every part of every song in every way. So basically the soundtrack is composed by them.
Right.
I mean, really, that's what it comes down to, with the exception of, the other musicians that are listed in the credits have lent a hand, but really I think this is their composition.
Right. It sounds like it was their idea. They kind of directed you exactly what to do, where to do it, and how to do it. And it was just kind of while they were doing something else. So yeah.
So he said there is one exception to this, and that's the opening intro, that one that we came in with our show. He said that was mostly done by the contractors, because they actually had written all the music out, and they had left that opening intro part because they had just didn't know that they needed it, because they weren't planning originally. They hadn't spec'd out the that opening sequence song.
Right.
They assumed it was just going to go straight to title screen, and then you have the rest of the gameplay. Game Arts later added that intro sequence in, and they said, hey, we need a track. Kasatani had already moved on to other projects.
Right.
And so he says, I had to have the contractors just whip something out, but I was still very picky about what they did. So that was not him, but everything else was pretty much them too.
And it was a nice little addition to the beginning of the game as well. So
yeah,
turned out great.
Yeah. Well, we went on a little bit long, but I think it was very well worth it, because there was just a gold mine of information from him. So if you're listening, Kasatani-san, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, so let's get into our next track. James, what do we have?
Next up, we have Stage 4, and we'll be right back.
that was stage 4, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis Mega Drive.
Really fun track. I really like this one a lot. It just was a little bit more upbeat and kind of happy and bright. I liked it.
That's some good VGM, man.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and even though it's
awesome.
different, like you can still see how it has ties back to the previous titles or the previous track, so that it's not just some like one-off track that somebody else wrote. It sound with that sound, but it's still fun and
cohesive.
bright, and
Yeah.
it has all that going for it. But then it has so much that's different, which is cool.
We had heard from the interview that they were trying to make use of that PSG to kind of retain the melody, or kind of accent the melody, and keep that focus going even when the sound effects are playing. Do you want to listen to that?
Yeah.
Real quick? I mean, might as well, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like my computer froze.
A little bit, but you can see how it definitely has some stuff going on that helps support what's going on in the track while sound effects and gameplay is going on.
Yeah, when I was listening, I thought it was a little bit more pronounced example, so maybe that wasn't the best example. Maybe we'll find another track that is a better one to showcase for that, but I still think it was cool to listen to.
Yeah, we could try again. And while we were going through, listening through, breaking the track down, it actually, one of the things that popped back up that reminded me of how this kind of fits into some of the previous tracks and still retains some of that feel is that kind of like drum line, the drummer boy type, what's going on.
Yeah, like the marching snare.
Yeah, like it has that live feel like the previous ones did, like a real drum. It sounds like it goes with live orchestra, live instruments, which I think it helps keep that theme running throughout the game, the feel of all the different music.
Yeah. Very cool use of all the channels.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty awesome. So let's move on to another track. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is stage 5-2. We decided to skip stage 5-1 and move over to this one. This is pretty awesome. So let's check it out. You just heard Stage 5-2, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon. this makes my skin just tingle. Like I like this is so good. I really like anytime you have bass bending and just really like slides. I mean, this sounds so clean and lifelike that I don't know, turns me on.
Yeah.
It's so good, man.
Well, and one of the feelings I got from this track, which I really liked, was that this track in itself feels like it has a story arc. It has something going on where, like, in the beginning it starts a little darker, kind of like you're back to reality, things are dangerous, and then there's the part where it gets kind of bright and almost happy again, like you're like this is a battle, like now you're winning,
like
and
the light shining through the clouds.
Yeah, and then it goes back to more like rock, and then it gets kind of alarming, and there's like so many different transitions. It feels like this is like a live battle that you're watching, like that you're experiencing throughout the level, that like the level itself is going through transitions.
Now there is something that I want to bring up that is just it's about to explode out of me. Like I want to explain this so much. So on two different channels, there is this bass line. There's a bass line on two different channels that's kind of like, I guess it's supporting. It's like they're supporting each other, but they're at the same time, it's almost like they're wrestling. It's almost trying to grab your attention. Like which one can grab your attention more?
Like bass battling.
Yeah. And so it sounds really, really cool. So first, let's listen to one of those channels, and then we'll listen to the other one, and then we'll play them together. I think that'll be kind of cool. So this is just channel 3 in that beginning part. It's kind of left and right. Then it gets all grungy. Yeah, I like that. All right, so let's listen to the other channel, channel 6, that same intro part.
That's awesome.
That's cool. All right, and let's play it together, and you can see how it just changes that whole bass line together. It's almost like two different guys sitting there with two different bass guitars looking at each other like, what are you gonna play next? Like,
yeah, it's like they're working against each other and together at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Here we go. Let's listen. All right, in case you missed it, let's one more time here. Throw the drums in as well. Oh God, so sick.
Yeah, and when you're listening to it for the first time, you might be like, wow, how is this happening? Like, this is so much going on. And then you see that, like, the two different channels are, like I said, working against each other and together at the same time. And it's just such a cool way to see how they're like, how each section is composed, where they sound cool by themselves, but then together they're like just even more insane.
Yeah, that floaty bass, it's just, it really blows my mind to think what these composers. I mean, it's not like this is an impossible thing to produce. You know, it's,
right.
It's not like there's anything amazingly, groundbreaking or something here. But I think it's just something that is clever and it's maybe not always thought of. And I don't know. I don't know. I wish that I could put myself in their shoes and just kind of be like, all right, I think we need a third bass in there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought it was pretty awesome.
Well, it's just like anything else. Like, you have your certain set of tools, just like a painter has paint, but then the way that you use the paint is what can be like just mind blowing. And I think this is a perfect example of, they have similar tools as everyone else, but the way that they decided to put it together was just very unique.
Yeah. So like Sonoda went up to Kasatani and was like, so what do you think about this track? And he's like, no, we need another bass in there.
Yeah. He's like, but I'm going to write it.
But I'm going to write it. It's going to be the better bass. Anyways, so, let's get into the story a little bit. I think we've been talking about all sorts of different stuff, but the story is kind of unique. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so this is an example of a game that when I got to a different region, the story was kind of tweaked and altered a little bit. So in Japan, the story goes that Alisia is the daughter of a great and powerful wizard that defeated the evil Baldur, trapping him in a cocoon and banishing him to space. But later, Baldur's followers torture and kill Alisia's father, and eventually the cocoon crashes back to Earth, leaving Alisia to battle Baldur and his followers anew. So it's kind of like the second coming of Baldur, but now she's alone, and she kind of has to do it herself.
Simple, but it works.
Yeah, so now in the North American and European version of the story, it's essentially the same, but it has a lot more of a cookie-cutter kind of vague feel to it. So in this version, Alisia is a female adventurer or gladiator that happens to be the only one that can destroy the second coming of a great evil that was returned to Earth via a falling silver star. So you can kind of see the correlation of like whoever the main evil villain is, it returns to Earth after being beaten the first time. Instead of a cocoon, it's a silver star.
That story is pretty weak, actually.
Yeah,
the North American version is like kind of, I mean, the first one wasn't, the Japanese one wasn't that intense, but I mean, why even change it? Like, what would be the reasoning for it? Why don't you just give it the same? It's not like it's that complex anyway.
Well, and not that it's that different. It's just much more simple. Like, they just boil down the story just to get you into the gameplay pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think the biggest difference between the two was the depiction of Alisia. In the Japanese one, she's kind of like this cute and feminine sorceress.
Much more anime.
And then in the North American and European box art, she's depicted as a more strong, powerful gladiator type that actually looks like she would have been a perfect candidate to date Axe Battler from Golden Axe. So, like, she's very muscly, awesome. And she's strong and powerful, which didn't have a problem with. It's just it was much more of a like cookie cutter generic fantasy scene.
Yeah. Now this game didn't do so well outside of Japan,
right?
Despite its critical acclaim, I think. And, this wasn't due to the fact that they made her more like a yoked out chick that basically you could just replace her with Arnold Schwarzenegger and it would be this, look like every other box art.
Right.
I don't think it was that. It was really like a lack of publicity and marketing, and that's Game Art's fault.
Right.
For that, for sure.
Yeah, because like you said, everyone that played this game, all the critics and anyone that just happened to come across it really loved this game. Like, this game has a cult following, and it's due to the fact that this game is awesome and the soundtrack is awesome and the graphics are awesome. Everything is just really good about this game.
Yeah, I think this is probably, it's got to be in my top 10 favorite Genesis games of all time.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. Anyways, let's get into some more music. What do we have next? I'm not sure. I'm not looking at the list.
Yeah, so we went from 5-2 with the last track, and now we're going to play 6-1.
That was from stage 6-1, composed by Mecano Associates.
This was another cool little track. It's much slower, much more lazy, kind of eerie feeling than some of the previous ones, and I really like that.
Yeah, I wrote down it has an awesome groove, but I think I meant to write groove. No, it's very chill. It's got that really cool bass line, got that almost like a piano harp or something, kind of on top.
Something kind of whimsical, adding to like this kind of.
Well, I wouldn't say whimsical. I'd say more like mysterious or like haunting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That kind of gives you that kind of eerie, something's not quite right feel.
Yeah, there's nothing funny about it, James.
Yeah. And I also like that the heartbeat feel that this had. And, the parts where the track really minimizes the instruments and stuff that's going on, and it has that dun dun feel, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like it almost feels to me like you're inside something that's living almost.
Yeah. Let's take a little detour and move over to stage 6-2. This is the second part of stage 6.
That was stage 6-2, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
Now, this is a very different track out of all the ones we heard. It's a little more anemic. It's more of a focus on that kind of punchy. There's almost like something's going wrong in the level. I think they were trying to have this kind of uneasy feeling to it, as I don't know, almost like a misinterpreted dance track or something. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
Well, I think one of the things that makes this track kind of stand out to me is that there's that main melody that's going on, but in the background, there's a lot of really subtle stuff that's going on and playing off of the main melody, where even though it's kind of more muted sounding, it seems like that's where most of the activity is in this track. So I could see it giving more of a like something in the shadows lurking kind of feel, or like there's kind of an intensity to this track that's kind of hidden, which I think can be something that adds like a creepiness or like a uneasy feel to a level.
They have these up and down tracks that have a cohesive feel but don't necessarily line up exactly, and their imagery for how it kind of corresponds to the level is very appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's unique about this game that works really well with this music is that, you're progressing, like we've said, stage 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, stuff like that each part, it feels like almost cinematic, that there's little like animations where you're not in control. It's like a demo of her like walking forward.
Right.
And I think that it kind of adds to the transitions between the levels, that like, okay, now you're in a new area.
Even though there's no words.
Yeah.
Like this unspoken, almost like a silent movie.
Yeah, and it has like this, okay, we're transitioning into a new area. The sound is different. And one thing I noticed about this track is that over time, the track builds and adds more instruments, and it makes you feel like the deeper you get into the level, like the more intensity that's going on, there's more subtlety, there's more things here and there that is kind of neat. So you get those little cutscenes almost, and then the track continues to build and build and build, and I really like that.
I think that goes really well with the look of the game too, because as you're playing, let's talk about the graphics a little bit, because as you're playing, there is a lot of little subtleties kind of like that kind of thrown in. It doesn't distract you from what you're looking at, but it adds to the atmospheric overview, I guess. So tell me about your thoughts on the graphics.
Well, right from the start, this game is beautiful. It has amazing textures. It has an amazing sense of 3D in these 2D sprites and the 2D backgrounds. Like you're walking in front of pillars and behind pillars, and they feel like round. Like they don't feel like just like a flat pillar. Yeah,
like you're playing Paper Mario.
Yeah, and there's great color variation. They have like a really good use of keeping certain tones together to make the backgrounds kind of fade, but then also have like a lot of cool textures, really awesome like sprite tiles and stuff like that. I mean, this game is just gorgeous.
It looks gorgeous on the Genesis. It really does.
Yeah.
Some Genesis titles kind of suffer from the muted, almost kind of like darker palette, almost like they turn down the brightness level a little bit.
Yeah.
But this game is very, very vibrant. It starts off, and we were just watching this not too long ago, with this intro movie, and it kind of reminds us of I think it was like Zelda Wind Waker, where it has this kind of embossed
like stone carving,
right? And it scrolls along that. It shows Game Art's logo, and you see this kind of depiction of whatever that, Baldar or whatever his name was, kind of destroying like civilization. These people just getting like torn apart.
Right.
And we didn't really pay attention at first, but when you look at it, it's like, wow, there's some really good detail going on here.
Yeah, like it's just like Zelda Wind Waker in that sense that it's like it's telling the lore of what happened before, because like we said in the story that this is kind of like the second coming of this evil. So it's like the people have recorded this, so you can kind of go back and see it depicted, this like really detailed idea of what they wanted to show people.
Yeah. The other thing I like is the level variation. I think that it was very unique. You start off in a forest, and then you might find yourself in this mechanical structure where you're kind of scaling. It's not like this, horizontal. These horizontal platforms that you're jumping on. It's actually at angles. You have to climb up and go through this maze, multiple paths, and just. I don't know. I think that they really put a lot of thought into the graphics.
Yeah, I mean, in the enemies, there's such a huge variety of enemies, and they have great details and designs.
I don't want to talk about the graphics too much. You guys really just got to play it.
Yeah,
it's something that we can't explain. You really just have to play the game to experience this, and you'll be very happy you did. If you know this game, and if you're like, guys, I'm in love with this game, then hats off to you, because it is stellar, and you know exactly what we're talking about. Anyways, you ready for some more music?
Yeah.
We've played pretty much everything at this point, but we haven't played the boss music yet.
Right.
Some pretty cool boss tracks. So why don't we get into the boss theme 1, and then we'll follow that with boss theme 2. We'll take a little break between.
You just heard Boss Theme 1, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
This is pretty cool. It sounds like a boss track.
Yeah, it has like the guitar in it almost feels like serrated. It's like feels sharp and kind of dangerous, which I thought was pretty cool. That there's this this undertone of like danger.
Yeah, it reminds me those little flourishes, the scales or whatever on the PSG. Sounds like when Sonic gets hit and he loses all of his rings.
Yeah,
that's what I kept hearing. I was like, oh man. Anyways, let's get into boss theme 2.
All right, that was Boss Theme 2, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
This is it's kind of got like a Halloween sound to it.
Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of scary.
Pretty rocking though.
Yeah. Oh man, like they packed a lot into that little track, and it has like this alarm feel, and I love the transition towards the end where it just explodes and goes crazy.
Yeah. Anyways, there's a few things I wanted to bring up. There's a level select. So spoilers, there's some cheats throw at you. During gameplay, press C on controller 2 and the screen fades to black, and you hold one of the button combinations on controller 2 and you can go to whatever stage you want.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to cycle through if you don't want to play the whole game. I don't see why you wouldn't, because it is pretty fun to go through.
Well, it's nice back in the old days that if you didn't have save states and weren't playing through an emulator, you could kind of at least see what some of the other levels looked like to kind of maybe push you to get better at the game, I guess.
So this is the stuff that I was looking for as a kid. I I was like, oh man,
Oh, yeah.
cheats. And it's not like I was trying to cheat at every game. I really wanted to give myself a challenge, but at the same time, I was like, just want to check them out. I can't get there. It's too hard.
Yeah, and whenever I would get a game from someone or find a game at a garage sale, first thing I would do is open up the manual and see if someone wrote in the back like notes like how to get to here, or like, oh, like check this out, or like on games that uses passcodes, like did someone else write their passcode in there, like so that I can see where they got. But
this is a game I would love to find at a garage sale. I don't own this. I wish I did.
Well, you'd be lucky if you did, because, like any other game that I'm interested in, I checked it out on eBay, and this game's not exactly very cheap.
I can't imagine it would be.
I've seen much more expensive games, but just for a cartridge, this is going for like $40 or $50. And then if you're trying
just the cartridge,
just the cartridge.
So you collectors just don't even bother.
Yeah, and if you wanted a box copy of it, it's around $100 or so. So, but then the Japanese one apparently is a lot harder to find. So that one's going for around $260 on eBay right now. So
I wonder why.
I think it's just like it was a game that just didn't have maybe many copies put it out there,
or the people that bought it kept it.
Maybe, there's not that many floating around.
Yeah, the Japanese box art is pretty sick looking.
It is. Yeah. It's a pretty beautiful illustration.
Yeah, it makes me look at the American and European box art. It's just like, meh.
Well, it was like a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of stuff that was kind of coming out at the time that had like that kind of sweaty, muscly warrior in a fantasy setting. Like all fantasy stuff had to be people, like even men, like wearing just like underwear basically, and they were like yoked out, like greased up, like they're going to a bodybuilding competition.
That describes it perfectly.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into another track. This is Stage 7, composed by Mecano Associates.
You just heard Stage 7, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
This track is really eerie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty different compared to a lot of the stuff, and I felt that it was almost like a riskier choice because it's so different. It's kind of takes its own time. It's really dark and subtle and beautiful. It kind of has that classic, almost like they wrote like a new classical song on the Genesis. And it kind of gave me a little bit of a Castlevania feel because of that dark kind of orchestral quality that it had.
Yeah, I got, I associate it with a level because when I was playing this level is a total pain in the butt.
I didn't get this far. So.
Yeah, you're basically crawling through this dungeon. There's technically 8 stages, but the 8th stage is really just the final boss.
Right.
So this is really like the last level, and they really like just pummel you with enemies and stuff on the screen. There's these green globs, and they take so much damage. Like you have to just keep wailing on them, and they shoot these orbs. Remember in the beginning of the episode, I was talking about how your pets will kind of block enemy fire. This is that part I was telling you about where all my pets died before I got to the boss because they kept saving my life. They kept saving my skin every time. But the track kind of, I think, goes with that because this is very dark. You're in this dungeon, and they're trying to maybe, I guess, explain through an auditory approach what this would be like if you didn't have the visuals, So I think they go together very well.
No, I mean, this track definitely gave me like a kind of dark castle or enemy fortress type feel. Like it didn't feel like I was in the forest or something like that. It felt like I was kind of confined. And knowing that this was level 7, you can kind of guess that you're getting towards the end. It's going to be a lot harder, a lot more of a pain in the butt, as you said.
Yes. Oh man, God, this level. I I was using save states. I mean, I had to because I wanted to get through it,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I abused the save states in this level. This is the one I'm pretty sure I had to use it the most. Anyways, so moving from stage 7, you move on to that final boss. Let's listen to the final boss track. There's 2 different final boss forms.
Right.
So there's 2 different tracks. So let's start off with the first one, and we'll be right back.
That was the first boss track, or Final Boss 1, composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon.
This was actually a lot more passive than the other boss tracks that we heard.
Yeah, that's kind of what I took away from it right from the beginning, was that it had a slower, more deliberate feel, and then got a little bit more dangerous. But it gave me like this imagery of as if this was on stage, like a theater, and that each player was in a dance that had like each one had their own role, and each player kind of had like a part to play, which I thought was kind of neat.
It's funny that you say that, because actually this kind of plays like that. You run into this gentleman or gentlewoman. I'm not sure what it is. This dude dressed in this white garb.
Okay.
And you approach him. You see him in the end of the first level. He's like, "Hey, you made it this far. We'll see if you can make it to the castle."
Yeah.
And I guess he's saying like our leader is coming back. So
right.
I guess he's kind of like the priest who is in charge of resurrecting Baldar.
Yeah, maybe it's the one that actually killed her father, because in the story it was kind of like the main leader, or the main follower of Baldur was the one that killed her father.
Yeah, yeah. So they don't have a name for him. They don't say his name. I think it's just like a priest. Mm-hmm. So you meet up with him and he says, "Hey, you're too late. He's already risen from the dead." Mm-hmm. And but he battles you first. And so there is this dance, because just like most 16-bit era, 8-bit era games, the boss's moves are kind of predefined, and they have this kind of, there's almost like this ballet to them, right?
Right.
Where it's not that hard. It's more of like learning about the timing and expecting what's going to happen next, and just kind of go with the flow. And if you can kind of master that timing, this, I had to play this through multiple times, really getting that, almost like you said, stage-like, performance-like, theater-like kind of feel. It plays like that. And so maybe this track having this almost kind of passive, triumphant feel to it is appropriate for this fight. And with what you were saying, I think they really do go hand in hand. It's a very good observation.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense now that you explain it, that this guy is not like your main focus. He's kind of like someone in your way. And I can actually see that with a lot of 16-bit, 8-bit era boss battles, that it's like, okay, it's time for me to advance, and the boss retreats, and now I have to retreat because the boss is going to attack. So it has that kind of like dance feel to it, I guess.
Yeah, he has some moves that are so, like, he shoots this one like homing dragon ghost at you that like flips around, and like you have to like dodge, but there's no way to get around it. You just have to accept that you're going to get hit. Really, I mean, like there's like, I was like, there's got to be a way to avoid it. There's got to be something, right? Well, there's nothing. Like, unless you run all the way across the screen and time it, you're just not going to happen.
Right.
But the next boss is pretty insane, because that's the coming of
Baldur.
Do you want to play that track?
Yeah. So let's play Final Boss 2.
All right, that was the second track from the final boss, and that was composed by Mecano Associates for Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis. Wow.
Yeah, this definitely feels like the climax to an ending of an orchestra.
And man, really, what a theatrical performance. This is like a dance again.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of goes with that first track, but this is like the evil iteration of it. Really clever use of all the different channels and how they kind of mend and mold together. Excellently composed, and just, it's got to be one of the coolest final boss tracks ever.
Yeah. I mean, because this one, it continues that kind of slow and deliberate sound, but it's a little bit more dangerous feeling, a little bit more sharp and calculating, like you're taking on someone that's bigger. And I like how, you feel like, okay, I'm in this dance and things are going well, I'm doing okay. And then there's that part at the end where it kind of like just builds and overwhelms you. And it's just like, that felt to me right before the loop that this is the boss unleashing his true power. Like he was almost toying with you this whole time.
Yeah.
And just made me feel like this guy is insanely dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great thing for a boss fight.
Well, there's a lot of little things going on in the background that are kind of, I think they're almost meant to like kind of disorient you.
Mm-hmm.
Like the little tiny riffs and stuff. There's something on channel 3 I was kind of listening to earlier. Do you want to listen to that real quick? It's very subtle. It's kind of dizzying, right? And that just kind of plays and just does its own thing. Like, and there's a lot of those little tiny changes in the channels that, I mean, obviously they're enhancing the sound, but they're doing something kind of repetitive, but at the same time changing up with other channels and kind of accenting those. So it is like this dance, this kind of orchestrated feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that we've seen, especially in recent years, a lot of really old soundtracks being, recomposed for symphonies and orchestras and stuff like that. Like, this seems like this would be perfect. It seems like it was already written for an orchestra.
Yeah,
and
this would work.
I can't imagine like how cool it would be to see like the conductor. And I feel like at that part where like, where it's like getting so big and swells so large that the conductor's just like arms are going crazy,
pouring sweat, and his hands are way up in the air, and he's just like dripping, and he's getting all pissed off, and like everybody's kind of looking at him like, oh man, like
like it's like hit that note and get going. And it's just like, that's one thing I love about seeing like live orchestras and stuff like that. It's seeing the conductor and they're like the emotional quality. Like if they're being subtle and pointing to different instruments, bringing in their cues, it's very soft and gracious. And then when it gets really energetic, like that conductor is just super energetic and snapping, and it's really cool.
Yeah. So when you're playing the game, Baldar is your conductor.
Yeah.
And Alisia is just like the little puppet floating around. This battle is actually not that hard. He's a pretty cool looking boss. He's got like weird like head shooting out of one side and like guns shooting out of the other side.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it's a little tricky with the timing and stuff, but once you figure it out, it's really not that hard. But it's a cool boss, and when you beat it, game over and everything's happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I hope you guys liked the episode today. I had a blast. This was really fun.
Yeah. Oh man, the soundtrack was just so good. I feel like drained from just listening to it.
Yeah. No, I want to you want to start over? Start the whole episode over. Anyways, so today we covered the music from Alisia Dragoon on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, composed by the Mecano Associates, which is Fumihito Kasatani, Nobuyuki Aoshima, Mamoru Ishimoto, Yoko Tsunoda, and Mariko Sato. And man, had a good time.
Yeah. Oh, me too. If you want to know more about the show, you can check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and track lists. We can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at Pixelated Audio.
Yes. And if you like the show and if you had a good time listening to the soundtrack with us, make sure you leave us a review on iTunes. We always appreciate that.
And if you're new to the podcast, make sure to check out some of our past episodes like Restar, Golden Axe, and Bob, all on the Sega Genesis.
Yeah, Golden Axe. Called that one out. Anyways, yeah, so when you beat everything, what's really cool is you get this cool like percentage completion.
Right.
You got Alisia standing there and it's like, oh, you did this much damage, you took out this many enemies, and you collected this many items, and this is your level. All these really cool little stats. But it's got a really cool ending, and the staff roll is really awesome. So we're going to check out the staff roll. See you guys in a few weeks, and make sure to check the feed for the next episode.